If you ask someone anywhere in the world to picture California, the image would arrive instantly. Beaches, Hollywood, the Golden Gate in fog, a highway curving along sea cliffs. And Washington, rain, Seattle, coffee shops, maybe a mountain in the background. None of those images would be wrong, but almost all of them would be incomplete. Because the same state that exports Hollywood also holds the hottest place in the Western Hemisphere. One of the largest agricultural valleys on Earth, and ghost towns where gold rush memory still sits in the dust. And the state known for rain and coffee is split down the middle by a volcanic mountain wall. Its dry eastern half gets less rainfall than parts of Arizona. This is the Pacific West most people never see, not because it is hidden, but because the coast is so famous that the rest of the map disappears. 2 states, 2 global brands, and a geography that breaks every shorthand. Together, California and Washington cover more than 260,000 square miles, but global perception is anchored to a thin coastal strip. The majority of each state's population lives within a few hours of the ocean. The rest of the land holds a different world entirely. California alone contains more distinct climate zones than most entire countries. Geographers have counted over a dozen within its borders. From coastal fog forest to alpine granite to below sea level desert, the variety compresses into one state line. Washington holds the same compression, temperate rainforest on one side of a mountain range. Near desert steppe on the other, separated by fewer than 150 miles. The reason the interior stays invisible is simple. The coast is too powerful a story. Hollywood, Silicon Valley, the tech campuses, the surf culture, these became the global shorthand for an entire region. Seattle exported rain and coffee, and that single image replaced an entire state. Behind the famous names sit engineered water systems that move rivers across hundreds of miles. Volcanic landscapes where an eruption reshaped an entire region within living memory. Working towns that never appear in a single tourism campaign. And agricultural valleys that quietly feed much of a continent. The Pacific West is not one postcard. It is a compressed world of competing geographies held together by the same ocean. And the best way to understand it is to stop looking at the edge and follow the map inland. The coastline built the brand, but the real story starts where the pavement turns inland. The Pacific Coast Highway is one of the most photographed roads in the world. But the story it tells about California is one chapter presented as the whole book. Start in San Diego. The coastline runs north past Los Angeles into the cliffs of Big Sur, where the road narrows to a ribbon pinned between granite and open ocean. This is the California the world carries in its head, and it is barely 50 miles wide. The entire coastal strip represents a fraction of the state's actual territory. Hollywood gave Los Angeles a global stage in the 1910s. San Francisco became an icon of culture, protest, and technology. Tourism campaigns sold the Pacific Coast Highway as a life experience. Washington followed the same pattern. Seattle and the Olympic Coast became shorthand for the whole state. But the Cascades create a rain shadow so extreme that parts of eastern Washington get less rainfall than Tucson. On the same summer day, San Francisco might sit at 60 degrees while Sacramento 90 miles inland reaches 100. The coast is not just an edge. It functions as a climate wall. Highway 1 was not just a scenic road, it was an infrastructure decision that reinforced coastal primacy. The most famous route follows the ocean, not the interior valleys. The coast made these states famous. It also made the rest of them invisible, but the valley behind the mountains feeds a continent. Cross one mountain range east of the Pacific Coast and California changes completely. The Central Valley stretches 450 miles from Redding in the north to Bakersfield in the south. It is flat, wide, and in summer, brutally hot. Temperatures in Fresno and Bakersfield regularly pass 100 degrees Fahrenheit, while San Francisco, 3 hours west, sits in fog at 60. This valley produces roughly a quarter of all the food grown in the United States. California leads the nation in dairy. It grows more than 80% of the world's almonds, the grapes, citrus, lettuce. And tomatoes that stock grocery shelves across the continent often start here. In soil most outsiders never picture when they hear the word California. But the valley is dry. Average annual rainfall in parts of the southern Central Valley is under 10 inches. What makes this land productive is not climate. It is engineering. The California Aqueduct carries water more than 400 miles from the Sacramento River Delta down to Southern California. It is one of the longest water conveyance systems on Earth, and most of it runs through landscapes that look nothing like the state's coastal image. Concrete canals cutting through brown, sun-baked terrain, pumping stations lifting water over mountain passes, reservoirs sitting in valleys where the natural rainfall could never sustain what grows around them. Every swimming pool in Los Angeles, every lawn in San Diego, every faucet in a Southern California suburb is connected to this system. The coast depends on the interior, and the interior is a place most coastal residents have never visited. Bakersfield is California's 9th largest city. It's an oil town and an agricultural hub surrounded by flat, dry land. A median home there costs roughly a third of what the same house would cost in the San Francisco Bay Area. Fresno, the 5th largest city in California, has a larger population than Atlanta, yet outside the state, neither city registers in most people's image of California. The California that outsiders know is coastal, expensive, and photogenic. The California that feeds the country is flat, hot, affordable, and largely invisible. The Central Valley was not always farmland. Much of it was marshland and seasonal floodplain before irrigation reshaped it in the early 20th century. And the people who built its agricultural economy came from somewhere else. Dust Bowl migrants from Oklahoma and Texas arrived in the 1930s. Mexican and Filipino farm workers followed in successive waves. The valley's identity was shaped not by Hollywood or Silicon Valley, but by the labour demands of an agricultural empire that needed hands in the field, season after season, decade after decade. That history is still visible in the towns, the food, the churches, and the demographics of the valley floor. So this is the California that does not appear in the postcard, a valley that feeds a continent, an aqueduct that keeps the coast alive. Cities that most outsiders could not name, and a landscape that looks nothing like the beaches, bridges, and boulevards the world associates with this state. The valley feeds the cities, the aqueducts keep them alive, and the desert beyond tests what any of it can sustain. How extreme does California get when the last of the water runs out? East of the Central Valley, the land does not stay flat, it climbs. The Sierra Nevada is a granite wall roughly 400 miles long, rising to over 14,000 feet. And on the other side, the ground drops to the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere. Mount Whitney stands at 14,405 feet. Badwater Basin in Death Valley sits at 222 feet below sea level. The straight line distance between them is less than 85 miles. Yosemite Valley is the most famous window into this range. Granite walls carved by glaciers, waterfalls dropping thousands of feet. And valleys so steep they feel like corridors cut into stone. But Yosemite is only one valley in a mountain range that shapes the climate of the entire state. The Sierra intercepts moisture from the Pacific, wringing rain and snow out of westbound air. Everything east of the crest is drier. And then there is Death Valley. The air temperature here has reached 134 degrees Fahrenheit, among the highest ever reliably recorded on Earth. In summer, the ground surface can exceed 200 degrees. The basin is so far below sea level and so walled in by mountains that heat pools inside it like water in a bowl. No other state in the lower 48 compresses this much vertical geography into so little horizontal distance. Back on the Sierra's western slopes, at around 5,000 to 7,000 feet of elevation, something else grows that exists nowhere else on Earth in the wild. Giant sequoias. The General Sherman tree in Sequoia National Park is the largest living organism on the planet by volume. Its trunk alone contains roughly 50 to 500 cubic feet of wood. These trees are not just large. They are biological evidence of a specific microclimate that the Sierra Nevada's western face creates. Enough moisture, enough altitude, enough winter snow to protect the roots. And enough summer warmth to sustain growth over millennia. Drive south from the Sierra and the landscape shifts again. Joshua Tree sits where the Mojave and Colorado deserts meet, at elevations between 2,000 and 5,000 feet. The trees themselves are not trees at all. They are giant yuccas. And they grow in a landscape so different from the alpine meadows a few hours north that it could be a different continent. From snow-covered granite to salt flats below sea level to desert yucca forests, California compresses biomes that in most countries would be separated by thousands of miles. California stretches from sea level to 14,000 feet, from furnace heat to alpine snow. The highest and lowest points in the contiguous United States are neighbours inside a single state border. And none of it looks like the California most people carry in their heads. But California is not the only Pacific state that hides extremes behind a familiar name. 800 miles to the north, another state has the same problem. So far, we have crossed California from coast to desert, from sea level to the highest summit in the lower 48. We have seen a state that exports glamour but runs on agriculture, aqueducts and engineered water moving hundreds of miles. But California is only half of the Pacific West story. 800 miles north, another state has the same problem. Washington is famous for exactly one city and one weather pattern: Seattle and rain. But east of the Cascade Range, some areas receive less annual rainfall than Tucson, Arizona. The reason is a mountain wall. The Cascade Range runs north to south through Washington and splits the state in two. Pacific air hits the western slopes and drops its moisture as rain and snow. By the time it crosses the peaks, the air is dry. The Hoh rainforest on the Olympic Peninsula receives around 140 inches of rain a year. Yakima, 3 hours east, averages 8. Western Washington is a world of islands, inlets and ferry routes. Puget Sound connects dozens of communities by water. Roughly 60% of Washington's population lives in the Puget Sound metropolitan area. Most of the state is somewhere else entirely. The San Juan Islands, north of Seattle, have their own pace. Reachable only by ferry or small plane, they feel like a separate region entirely. Washington operates the largest ferry system in the United States. For many communities, the ferry is not tourism, it is the commute. Cross the Cascades, and the landscape changes within minutes. Green forest gives way to open steppe and dry sky. Eastern Washington looks nothing like the state most people imagine. This is high desert, open plateau and farmland under constant sun. Yakima sits in one of the driest parts of the state but grows more apples and hops than almost anywhere in the country, thanks to irrigation. From Cascade snowmelt. And then there is Spokane. Washington's second largest city sits 280 miles east of Seattle, closer to Idaho than to Puget Sound. Spokane has its own economy, its own culture and its own weather. Summers are hot and dry, winters bring heavy snow. The Tri-Cities of Richland, Kennewick and Pasco sit at the confluence of the Columbia and Yakima rivers. Wine country, nuclear history. And agricultural processing share the same zip codes. If you told someone in eastern Washington that their state is defined by coffee shops and rain, they might not recognize the place you are describing. One state, two climates, two economies, two landscapes that share a governor but very little else on the ground. Just like California, Washington's coast dominates the global image, and just like California, the interior tells a different story. Eastern Washington produces some of the largest wheat harvests in the nation. Most of it ships through Pacific ports that Western Washington residents drive past without a second thought. The same state that gave the world grunge music and coffee culture has a dry interior that looks more like the high plains than the Pacific. Northwest. But these mountains do more than divide the climate. The Cascades are volcanic, and they are not finished. The mountains do not just divide the climate, they sit on some of the most active geology in North America. What does it mean to build a state on volcanoes? Mount Rainier is visible from downtown Seattle on a clear day. It is also one of the most potentially hazardous volcanoes in the United States. The mountain carries 25 named glaciers, more glacial ice than any other peak in the contiguous 48 states. And roughly 80,000 people live in Lahar hazard zones along its river valleys. 60 miles to the south, Mount St. Helens proved what Cascade volcanoes can do. In May 1980, a lateral blast leveled 230 square miles of forest in minutes. The eruption removed over 1,000 feet from the summit. Today, young trees grow inside the crater. The mountain is still active. And it is part of a volcanic arc that stretches the length of the Cascades. But the volcanoes are only half the story. The same mountain range that built them also channels the Columbia River, one of the most powerful waterways in North America. It drains parts of 7 states and moves more water than any other Pacific-bound river on the continent. In 1942, the Grand Coulee Dam was completed on the Columbia. It remains one of the largest concrete structures ever built. The dam generates roughly 21 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity per year. And through the Columbia Basin Project, it irrigates over 600,000 acres of land that was once sagebrush desert. The water turned eastern Washington into farmland. The electricity made the state one of the cheapest places for power in America. That cheap electricity now attracts a different kind of industry. Data centers operated by some of the world's largest technology companies cluster in central Washington, drawn by hydroelectric rates that are among the lowest in the earth. Nation. Aluminum smelters and food processing plants followed the same logic decades earlier, and the Columbia itself remains a working trade route. Barges carry wheat and agricultural goods from the interior down to the port of Portland and onward to Pacific shipping lanes. The river connects the dry interior to the global economy. Washington runs on water and sits on fire. The volcanoes built the mountains, the rivers built the economy. And most of it happens far from the coast that carries the state's name. But neither California nor Washington has fully escaped the tension between the places people see and the places where life actually happens. Bodie, California, was once one of the largest cities in the state. Today it sits preserved exactly as it was abandoned, a ghost town in the high desert where the gold ran out. In the 1880s, Bodie had roughly 10,000 residents, a Chinatown, a red light district, and 65 saloons. Now it has 0. California State Parks maintains it in a state of arrested decay, not restored, not demolished, frozen in the moment the boom ended, The Pacific West is not just where people arrive. It is also where booms ended, where affordability survived, and where older identities persist. Bakersfield sits about 110 miles north of Los Angeles. Most outsiders drive through it on the way to somewhere else. But Kern County produces more oil than any other county in California. Bakersfield's economy runs on petroleum, agriculture, and logistics. A family home here can cost a fraction of what it does in Los Angeles. Same state, different economy, different life. 300 miles further north, Redding marks the top of the Central Valley. Beyond it, California turns into forest and mountain. Redding is closer to the Oregon border than to San Francisco. Its identity belongs to Northern California's timber and ranching culture. On the coast, Eureka feels like a different state entirely. Victorian storefronts line a main street built on timber money. The nearest freeway is hours away. Eureka's Humboldt County has been shaped by logging, fishing, and its distance from everywhere else in California. The Carson Mansion, a redwood Victorian showpiece, has stood here since 1886. This is California before anyone called it a dream. Now look at Washington. The same pattern holds. Behind the famous city there are other cities with older roots and different stories. Tacoma sits just 30 miles south of Seattle. It has a working port, a glass art district, and a median home price roughly half that of its neighbour. The port of Tacoma has been moving cargo since 1918. Its identity was built on timber, shipping and smelting long before Seattle became a tech capital. Tacoma's Museum of Glass and its Bridge of Glass reflect a civic investment in art that has nothing to do with Silicon Valley or software. On the other side of the Cascades, Spokane is Washington's second largest city. Most people outside the state could not place it on a map. With roughly 230,000 residents, Spokane anchors eastern Washington's economy on healthcare, education, logistics, and agriculture. It gets less annual rainfall than Tucson. This is the dry Washington that the Seattle image erases completely. In both states, the further you move from the famous coast, the more affordable life becomes. But that distance also means distance from the image. These are not failed versions of Los Angeles or Seattle. They are places with their own economies, their own histories, and their own reasons for being. Bakersfield runs on oil, Eureka remembers timber, Tacoma moves cargo, Spokane feeds a region. Each one proves a different piece of the Pacific West. These towns are not hidden. They are simply outside the frame that the coast built. If the Pacific West is already this complex, what happens when technology, migration, and growth reshape it further? Before it was Silicon Valley, this was the Santa Clara Valley, one of the most productive fruit-growing regions in California. Apricot and cherry orchards once covered the valley floor. By the 1980s, semiconductor plants had replaced most of them. Today the region holds some of the most expensive real estate on the planet, built on land that was once among its cheapest farmland. And the water those orchards once used is now fought over by cities, farms, and technology campuses that all need more of it. But technology is only one engine reshaping the Pacific West. The other one arrives by sea. The Port of Los Angeles handles roughly 10 million container units a year. It is the busiest port in the Western Hemisphere. From these docks, goods travel by rail and truck into the Central Valley, across the desert and onto the rest of the continent. 800 miles north, the ports of Seattle and Tacoma form the other Pacific Gateway. Together they rank among the top 5 in the country. The Pacific West does not just export culture and technology, it is the physical doorway through which much of America's imported goods arrive. But trade is not the only thing flowing through the region. People are moving too, and the pattern is changing. For the first time in decades, California's population growth has stalled. Some years, more people have left the state than arrived. Coastal housing costs pushed remote workers and families toward inland cities that were once considered too far from the action. In Washington, the same pressure pushed growth eastward. Cities like Spokane and the Tri-Cities saw some of the state's fastest population increases. Towns built for 10,000 people started absorbing newcomers who expected the infrastructure of cities 10 times that size. And it is not only people arriving in the interior, the digital economy followed the same path for a very specific reason. Eastern Washington has become one of the fastest growing regions in the country for data center construction. The reason is power. Columbia River dams, built in the 1930s and 1940s for irrigation, now generate some of the nation's cheapest electricity. Infrastructure designed for New Deal farms now powers cloud computing. The 1930s are running the 21st century. But every transformation in the Pacific West runs into the same limit: water. California already moves water hundreds of miles through engineered canals. Growth adds demand to a system that was stretched before the tech boom began. In Washington, the Columbia River powers cities, irrigates farms, cools data centers, and sustains endangered salmon runs. Every use competes with every other. Technology, trade, and migration are rewriting the map of the Pacific West, but the geography does not rewrite itself. The same deserts, mountains, and rivers that built these states now set the terms for what growth can actually look like. A dam built for wheat farmers now keeps servers running. An orchard became the most valuable real estate in tech. Every bargain has a cost. The Pacific West is not standing still, but neither is the geography beneath it. After everything the map reveals, what does the Pacific West actually look like now? We started at the coast because that is where the world starts when it thinks of California and Washington. But the coast was always just the edge. Behind the beaches, we found a valley that feeds a continent, aqueducts moving water across hundreds of miles of dry land, granite peaks rising above 14,000 feet, and a salt flat that sits below sea level less than 85 miles away. California is not one place. It is several, held together by engineering and selective storytelling. Behind the rain, we found a volcanic mountain wall that splits Washington in two, a western edge with temperate rainforest and island ferry networks, an eastern half with dry wheat fields, canyon rivers, and hydroelectric dams powering data centers that did not exist a generation ago. One state, two entirely different worlds. This is one of the few places on Earth where you can stand at sea level. drive to a summit above 14,000 feet, descend below sea. Level cross a volcanic range. And reach an arid steppe, all within a single day inside 2 adjacent states. The compression is the story, not the beach, not the rain. The compression. California and Washington are 2 of the most recognizable names on the planet. Say them anywhere and an image appears instantly. Beaches, rain, Hollywood, coffee. Tech campuses, national parks, and all of those images are real, but they are the edge of something much larger. Behind the coast, California stretches into valleys that feed a continent, deserts that test human limits, mountains that hold the largest living organisms on Earth, and towns that carry the memory of gold rushes, oil booms, and agricultural empires. Behind the rain, Washington splits across a volcanic mountain wall into a dry interior of farms, rivers, dams, and cities that most outsiders cannot picture. The Pacific West is not a postcard. It is a compressed world of competing geographies, engineered lifelines, and layered histories held together by the same ocean, but shaped by forces most people never associate with these familiar names. The next time you think of California or Washington, do not start at the coast, start at the map. Because the real Pacific West is the one most of the world has never looked at long enough to see. If 2 of the most famous places on Earth are this misunderstood, what else is the map hiding from us?